So thank you for joining us today. Hi and welcome. Um, we have about 45 minutes together to discuss a topic that has significant weight as well as opportunity behind it. But before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. I'm joined by my colleague at Microsoft, Corey Lee. Corey, um, how about you start? I'd love to hear your introduction first.
Sure thing, Brandon. Great to be here today, especially as we're kicking off one of my favorite months in the year, October, and Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I think tremendous timing to be having a conversation around identity. As stated, Corey Lee currently serves as the Security CTO for Microsoft Education. And interesting enough, I have a fairly extensive background in the identity space. Spent a number of years focused on helping customers with identity modernization and identity strategy. So, looking forward to today's conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. So my name is Brandon Nolan, and I've spent the majority of my career solving complex identity challenges, from helping companies recover from devastating ransomware attacks to raising awareness and getting buy-in at the boardroom level. I'm driven by the opportunity to empower others and foster meaningful partnerships that create lasting impact. So we're going to go ahead and move along. Throughout today's session, you're going to see QR codes at the bottom or the top of the different slides. These allow you to quickly connect with us at any time during the presentation if something comes to mind. Feel free to reach out instantly on any topic there. All right, just a short bit on who Oxford is. You probably know who Microsoft is, so we'll start with who Oxford is. Oxford dates back to 1988 when a group of friends attending Oxford College were trying to figure out what they wanted to do after college, and they didn't really want to get real jobs, so they decided to start a company that focused on building computer training programs. So flash forward to today, Oxford is known worldwide for our deep subject matter expertise with Microsoft Identity. Our focus will consist of three areas today. What we're hearing and seeing from higher education organizations regarding the challenge. We're going to take a look at a recent use case from a customer and describe the challenges they had and how together we solve for those challenges. And then finally, we're going to close with sharing our insights, and we'll be debunking some myths along the way as well. All right, I'm ready. Corey, you ready?
Ready to go.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so modern universities rely on collaboration, not just within their own campuses, but across multiple universities and even international boundaries. Groundbreaking innovations are born from that shared research efforts that they do, which require collaboration tools and processes to work well, but also protect the fruit of those efforts. An example would be a joint project on a global issue such as climate change, where multiple universities work together with government bodies or research organizations. They're sharing data, having access in real time, as well as governing this by having the ability for the teams to request that access. Certain projects require collaboration between departments, research institutions, and industry partners to maximize those resources and expertise. From a security perspective, while collaboration is beneficial, it increases the complexity of the system. With the more people involved, the risk to data security also rises, and the need for strong identity security and governance to protect the sensitive data from being accessed by unauthorized parties during these collaborative efforts is super important. So moving along, we've seen the news. We've all been reading about different examples. We know the consequences, like loss of sensitive research or exposure of student records. So we know that unsecured data sharing, especially in collaborative efforts, poses major risks to both intellectual property and sensitive information. Um, it's a significant challenge to manage access when different departments or campuses operate with varied identity management systems. Outdated or manual processes increase the risk of that unauthorized access, which then leads to those data breaches. Universities face inherent difficulties when collaborating with external partners, each with their own systems and their own security processes and protocols, but still incredibly important to integrate these systems securely, ensuring that the data remains protected despite that increased complexity.
And Brandon, I think there's a couple key points that you hit on that are super important to kind of double click on, which I know we'll talk about it throughout today's webinar. But one of which is this category of external partners
Mm,
inside of the higher education space. This doesn't just mean one type of collaborator, as you described earlier. You know, this can be collaborators that work for external vendors, collaborators that work for external research firms, collaborators that are part of nonprofits or part of think tanks or part of other, we'll call it affiliate organizations. So super interesting to just kind of see the dynamics of collaboration blow up in the context of collaborators and external partners. And I can't wait to kind of dissect that a little bit today in terms of how we manage that breadth of collaboration in a seamless and secure way.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. We're going to get into also the challenge that it is that a lot of us in this space have really just focused on that internal aspect of these identities and have not focused as much on this on the security of these externals, whereas we really need to be thinking about that together when we're designing these types of solutions.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'll hit the last two here, and then we'll move along to the next one. So compliance regulations like GDPR and FERPA, they're going to be adding additional complexity, especially when we're dealing with these international collaborations. We've got data sovereignty laws that we have to deal with. Those further complicate the matters by limiting where the data can be stored or shared to, potentially even hindering these research cooperations. So it takes a lot of tact and skill and legal effort to figure out how to do this safely and legally. As universities grow and they take on more of these research partners, the growing challenge of maintaining the secure access while supporting collaboration is becoming more and more important. And the need to strike that balance between enabling collaboration and ensuring that the security protocols are good enough to protect that sensitive information are standing out. So as we move forward in the presentation today, we're going to be weaving in the role of Microsoft Entra ID and simplifying this access management, particularly by unifying identity management across the entire university network and how it reduces the risk of data breaches by providing integration with existing university infrastructure, ensuring less clicks and a more secure experience for users. OCG's approach when with identity security by improving system integration and managing that access across the various platforms. And shortly, we're going to be showing that case study that I promised earlier, where OCG and Microsoft work together to boost the university's collaboration while enhancing security, compliance, and that user experience. Cloud-based identity solutions like Microsoft Entra are becoming the new standard in supporting scalable universities' identity security. As institutions grow and collaborate with international partners, those cloud-based solutions allow that secure expansion without compromising on access management or security. And we have to definitely talk about the tools, right? The collaboration tools. It's not just about identity for the sake of identity. If we were just out there doing business for identity, we'd be doing a good job. But we've got to solve for these actual tools where the work's being done, right? So the role of tools like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive in fostering that secure collaboration across departments and with external partners is paramount to that good workflow experience. These tools, when combined with Intra ID, protect data while streamlining collaborative workflows, ensuring sensitive information remains secure throughout the research process. Corey, is there something that you'd like to highlight here?
Yeah, I think there are two things that jump out to me, one of which is in regards to um, the architecture conversation, specifically how important it is to understand the existing architectures of higher education environments and helping organizations understand what their existing architecture may be. Mostly because oftentimes in the collaboration space, whether it be from an end user perspective or a security perspective, it comes down to how we've designed identity that either enables and strengthens collaboration or that creates somewhat of a less than ideal user experience. So I do think that as we continue to derive a deeper understanding of reference architectures in the higher education identity space, we become more equipped to really ensure we understand what's the right way to kind of adapt those architectures to support some of the outcomes you described on the security and user perspective. The second piece that I think is important to call out is we know that higher education environments are heterogeneous. So when it comes to collaboration, there may not just be one tool, or for that matter, just Microsoft tools in use to support
Yeah.
that collaboration. Although things like Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, et cetera, are highly used, we know that other SaaS platforms and data sharing and collaboration platforms like Zoom and Salesforce and Box, et cetera, are also highly utilized, at which point, very important that we're wrapping, kind of our security guardrails and overall identity architecture around those services and the solutions that they bring to each organization. So hopefully, once again, we're moving towards a more holistic conversation around how we help drive comprehensive and end-to-end collaboration from a security and user perspective.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would say that the on the architecture solution side, super important to have the context. Context is king, right? So if you can't throw an IAM solution in there that with no experience of higher education. There's just too much at stake. You have to make sure that the partner that you're using understands deeply the challenges that are there. There's technologies in this space that nobody else uses. They're built for and built by higher education. So there's a lot of nuance here that we're talking about.
Lots of nuance and lots of process,
Yes.
and emphasis on the process piece, because I'm sure in the identity space, when you start talking about workflows and things of that nature, you're only as streamlined as the processes that you have behind the technology. So, yeah, great point. Just in regards to the reality of the situation.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Corey. All right, so let's take a closer look at this real life scenario involving a university that found itself in a bottleneck when it came to collaboration and security. This university, they depended heavily on internal and external partnerships to drive research, learning, and innovation, but their identity access management system was outdated, really becoming like a roadblock to their productivity. The system lacked the automation components to ensure that the students and the faculty could timely get access to the resources that they needed. This then led to delays when new users came on board and when existing users needed access to new tools and systems. So imagine a faculty member trying to collaborate on a research project, but stuck waiting for approvals to access to shared resources because the identity management system wasn't efficient. That's exactly the kind of delay this university was faced regularly. And to make matters worse, their Active Directory group memberships that they had, which managed access permissions, were outdated, posing security risk and further slowing the operations. The leadership, they understood that this was the challenge, and it was time for an upgrade. The goal was really to modernize the IAM processes for better security and smoother collaboration. They implemented a hybrid IAM solution, leveraging their A5 license that they had, as well as intra ID governance. Excuse me, to to keep things running during the transition, we OCG temporarily used Microsoft Identity Manager for on-premises provisioning while moving toward Workday, as the organization was rolling out Workday for staff and student provisioning. So at the same time, Intra ID governance was integrated to streamline that role-based management of those AD groups into memberships, allowing permissions to be updated in real time as those users joined or left or changed roles. Um, the results are really transformative by automating the user provisioning. The university was able to reduce the delays in the access, allowing faculty and staff to collaborate more effectively across departments with those external partners. Those outdated group memberships were removed, improving that security by ensuring that the users had the access only to the resources that they needed when they needed them. Looking ahead, the solution was really built for scalability. The integration with Workday and the other systems meant that the university's IAM system could handle both, future growth seamlessly and as well as kind of moving forward. So whether onboarding new collaborators or expanding departments, the system remained flexible and efficient. In the end, the university not only solved for the identity management challenge, but set the stage for faster collaboration, better security, and a system designed to grow alongside its needs. And it's a good example of how the right technology can remove friction and empower teams to focus on innovation and education rather than navigating those outdated processes. Corey, does this ring true with your experiences? Have you seen this in other places?
Unfortunately, I have probably much more than I would like to see. And I think the reality is a large number of higher education institutions or education industry customers at large are looking at how can they refactor identity. And refactoring identity can come in multiple forms. It can come in the form of what we're describing here, which is, hey, we have current identity management processes that may be a little outdated, but also maybe are hanging off of infrastructure that is also outdated, such that it is putting a bit more pressure and, quite frankly, creating more challenges for the institution. Whether that be because of timely updates and changes, or inability to customize and extend the functionality, or just the ability to ensure that once again timely activities can happen, like user onboarding, offboarding, and so forth. So I think there's a lot to glean from here, and probably the bottom line kind of major focus area is, as we think about identity modernization in environments that have lots of nooks and crannies, very multifaceted environment, from applicant users to alumni to adjunct faculty members to core staff and faculty. Um, how we can really rally around modern processes that support the, we'll call it strong lifecycle management around those various user types, but also introduce cloud friendly and very optimized functionality to support some of those collaboration use cases that can really be matrixed across those user personas, right? Especially when we start to bring in, excuse me, external users. So yeah, I think at large we're seeing lots of identity modernization, both at the identity lifecycle level, as well as identity modernization around the governance cycle, meaning like who really is getting access to the applications and the services that we see. You know, who really should have that access, and how do we dynamically offer that in a way that's once again standardized and user friendly. So
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And again, it's this is about empowering the business, right? The business of the university. It's not just focused on the technology for the sake of technology. We've got to solve challenges here. We've got to get out of the way. We've got to keep security out of the way until it's needed as well. These are different things that we hear all the time. Like how many clicks did you just add because you added that thing into our workflow, right? No, we're taking away clicks, right? We've got to think like that when we're dealing with things that are going to impact those users. Thanks for that, Corey. That's great. All right, moving on here. So this next section is set up to provide a deeper understanding and share some lessons learned. So let's go ahead and let's start with some of those lessons learned first. Uh, All right, so in the upper left-hand corner here, we're going to kind of start there, work down, and then go over to the right. Complexity, we all hear this all the time, right? It's a buzzword at this point. Complexity, isolated tools. Well, the challenge is they're not sharing threat signals, and that leads to security gaps. And do you know what fills those gaps nicely? Bad guys. Threat actors love complexity and they love to hide in those gaps. They fit perfectly there. Blind spots. They occur when different systems do not communicate effectively, um, when they weren't created with one another in mind, or a significant amount of effort has gone into them to integrate them. They don't share that context. Identity has historically been only an infrastructure system, and many universities fail to see the necessity for a unified identity solution. We no longer can treat it like this. We can't have it like treated in this manner. We must think of it as a core element to our entire security architecture. When you think of it this way, you can then think of policy enforcement points, control planes to reduce risk. When you have disparate systems, you can't effectively or efficiently do this. There's significant risks of focusing too much on that internal security. We mentioned this a little bit before. We have to really consider that external collaboration threat as well. What does your external B2B and B2C identity estate look like? These need to be part of that conversation. If it's not your department, I would challenge you to make it a priority to build trust and build bridges with those who are responsible for it. It's too important to not include it in the bigger picture. This allows us to secure these external collaborations, especially when dealing with research, government, or international efforts. Keep compliance at top of mind up front in that conversation, but it shouldn't stop there. Too often we see checkbox compliance without actual risk mitigation. We need to dust off the threat modeling tomes of old and bring them back out to help us guide our compliance. You must marry compliance with risk mitigation to be truly effective. How to avoid these? Um, Communication is key, ensuring that you're sharing best practices in the organization, including proper governance and obviously regular security training. What else is there, Corey? Are there any misconceptions you hear from customers that we should clear up?
A lot. I think, you've hit on a number of things that I do believe represent common misconceptions. A few others to maybe name include the notion that we can really effectively secure the environment without having an accurate identity architecture
Mm,
that represents the true landscape of the environment. Regardless of how many identity providers exist, regardless of how many disparate identity provisioning solutions exist, it's super important to kind of have that macro view of what the landscape looks like, to your point, because that is where the adversaries tend to play. Normally in the blind spots in the scenes of that architecture. I think another common misconception is that the external users are somehow less risky than a lot of the other users in an environment. And I think some of this stems from the fact that maybe we don't necessarily have all applications exposed to the external users, but these external users have Active Directory accounts, or they have access to various other collaboration solutions, and we're not super clear on how those solutions are configured from an application access and governance perspective. This is where that residual risk absolutely start to extend down to our external users, right? And we got to have line of sight to those users. We also need to make sure that our incident response processes also include those users and the resources that they may have access to. So those are just a few, and I think you called out another one, which is just because we are compliant with regulatory controls does not mean we are secure in our collaboration scenarios. So, obviously there's a balance to strike between meeting regulatory requirements and security. But let's be very clear. When we think about securing an environment, very important that we're securing based on the threats we may believe we can be exposed to and the attack patterns that could exploit those exposures, right? Very different than just focusing on our controls that are configured and deployed to ensure we support our compliance or regulatory requirements. So identity is core to all of that, and super, super duper important to make sure that we are, once again, leveraging our identity architecture to really power our security architecture. So,
awesome. Thank you for that. I've got one that I wanted to share. Oh gosh, it's a sensitive topic because you can take it one way or another. But one thing that I've come across, and I had been a CISO in a past life as well, so I got to learn this from that side. So hear it from that side, if you will. Making choices based on what a vendor tells you. um, Listen to every side earnestly and check and cross check each other, right? If you get feedback from one vendor, take it to the other vendor and say, this is what they said about you. Tell me how this is right or wrong or indifferent, right? Do the homework on that, because a lot of vendors are out there to get the money at the end of the day, and they're going to say different things, or they're going to take things out of context. It's the oldest play in the book, right? But I'll tell you that it is so important to not just pick a good tool, but how that tool fits in your organization. What are you going to do with that tool? It's not just going to sit on the shelf, right? You've got to actually use this and integrate it. And what does this do to your budget? If you're taking something that's outside of a platform choice and you decide to go with a tool that is very specific and niche, that's okay. But you have to think about what that means for your budget, what it means for your team, because now you've got to staff up and think about the effectiveness of this tool and the efficiency of your team now having to learn this new tool, um, when they're already have 4 or 5 other tools that they're using as part of this.
yeah,
So yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And one thing that probably bothers me more than a lot of things is when we're rapidly having tool conversations without first having an architecture conversation, right? To your point, underutilizing tools is not a good thing for any customer. But more importantly, not understanding how to effectively do tool integration can
Mm,
absolutely let's just say, disrupt collaboration scenarios and, for that matter, the security architecture. So, my final, we'll call it misstep or misconception, is when there's the belief that I can buy zero trust. I can buy a
mm,
tool and it's going to give me zero trust and it's going to make sure that all my
yeah,
security worries go away. Well, the reality is, it's unfortunate to say this, but you cannot buy zero trust in a box. Zero trust is absolutely tied to enabling and supporting, we'll call it,
yeah,
adequate security for collaboration scenarios, but it is not a product. It is the outcome of a well architected and designed solution that uses products to power that solution. But once again, it is not in
yeah,
itself a product. So, yeah, that made me think of that when you mentioned the tooling conversation, because
yeah.
yeah, very common
I
misconception.
I always say zero trust comes from the thousands of decisions, the micro decisions that you make pursuing it.
Okay, okay, I see that. My response to that, or something that I commonly say as well, is uh, zero trust in its truest form is a modern approach to risk-based security,
Mhm.
right? And with that, right, when we think about you know, managing risk is not a product conversation,
Yep.
although some may make you think that. And security collaboration is not a product conversation. So, but much with everything, products do help drive and create affinity and synergy throughout those conversations. And one, will call it solution set or product category at Microsoft that's really designed to kind of attack that identity landscape is Intra. And Microsoft Intra is not just a product, it is a product family. And it is designed to support a number of different identity solution areas, to include directory services, identity governance, handling external identities, or users that are external affiliates, verifying internal and external users through strong verification, as well as managing permissions and applications and workloads, alongside of things like access to network-based resources. Probably one of the things that I get asked the most is like, "Hey, can you help explain the Microsoft name changes to me?"
Yeah.
Which can be very challenging, because if you don't know the name of something that you potentially own, or that you could be using to help address a challenge, then here lies a problem. You likely have more underutilized technology within your environment that could be helping to strengthen the architecture. So I think, super important to make sure that we're driving awareness around both higher education environments that can leverage Intra, whether it's through their A3 licensing, their A5 licensing, or beyond, to really support some of those identity needs that fit across that landscape you described earlier, Brandon.
Yeah, so I would point out that probably one of my I've got lots of favorites on here, but probably one of my new favorites is this bottom area, this network access area. And I love it because being an identity guy, having identity context in the decision making of establishing VPNs and kind of pulling that all together to a central policy enforcement point is amazing. We can now go forward and pull out some of these legacy VPN infrastructures and start replacing them with this technology. It's really it was a missing piece for a long time, so I'm really happy that that's there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think infusing, going back to that zero trust conversation, for a long time, there was a belief that um, just ZTNA on its own would help support zero trust outcomes. But now in a world where we recognize our zero trust architecture absolutely has to have network signal alongside of device signal, alongside of identity signal and application signal to effectively manage the risk profile of access within an environment. Super important signal to have. But I'll say also, I think one of the most exciting components on this slide for me, just based on what I've seen in the higher education space, is Entra verified ID and the ability to really improve the, we'll call it scenarios around step up authentication or around strong verification of users that could be external users to ensure that those users have a connected experience, but also that we're in many cases increasing the level of assurance that we have regarding external users that are interfacing and accessing resources within an environment. So super duper, we'll call it valuable and connected to the whole secure collaboration conversation.
I love how you brought in the signal aspect of that. So I always think of like with every signal that you have, that's an opportunity to improve your confidence in the decision that you're making ultimately.
Absolutely, 1000% true. And it comes to really manning the fort and ensuring that we know what things are really, we'll call it a risk for the environment or not. Another area of focus, I know that we've been very keen to hone in on is ensuring that going back to that architecture conversation, there is a very well understood blueprint to attacking the identity conversation in higher education environments. And a lot of that relates to some of what you described earlier, process improvements and helping with life cycle management and so forth. But it also extends to logins, single sign on, and the greater access management conversation that comes along for that. As we've seen both not an uptick in access scenarios and new threat types in the identity space. You probably heard this term, identity threat detection and response, or ITDR, is really starting to put an increased focus on how many doors do we have that users can leverage in order to access resources. And do we, to your point earlier, have the right policy enforcement or decision points in place in order to support those access control decisions? And I'm delighted to say that as we continue to ensure that there's strong identity architectures within the higher education identity space, we can continue to extend those architectures to support things like research collaboration, to support things like external user access scenarios across a wide range of applications, alongside of some of the edge cases, which mainly have to do with kind of that extended external user profile.
Yeah, so sorry, I just want to do a quick time check. We got about 5 minutes left. Can you quickly describe what I'm seeing on the left versus the right here?
Yeah, briefly put on the left, think of that as more of a, we'll call it a traditional identity architecture in from a single sign-on perspective in higher education environment. Multiple identity providers, generally multiple ways for users to log in and access resources and applications alongside of research. On the right-hand side, think of this as somewhat of a simplified architecture, that starts to reduce the number of identity providers, but also still allow many of those in-user application access and collaboration scenarios to be offered and delivered for the user population.
Okay, so I could start with like basically step 1, and then I can ultimately move over to step 2 if that's where my path takes me.
Absolutely. Step 1 on the left normally is current state. On the right is generally speaking a to be kind of simplified state. But you're correct. Starting with things like directory synchronization, lifecycle management, basic SSO, extending that to external user access management, research SSO, etc.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for that. Let me see what we have left here. I know we've got 1 or 2 slides that we definitely want to share. Is this one of them, or
Yeah, bottom line here is end-to-end secure collaboration is the name of the game. So as we're looking at these architecture conversations, ensuring that we have strong ways to onboard users, strong ways to govern the access of the users that have been onboarded, and then fronting that with the ability to ensure we're signaling and securing the resources and the applications that will be used by the users across the environment. So very important to attacking that end-to-end workforce secure collaboration conversation.
Awesome.
I believe on this next slide, which starts to build out some of those components. As we end here with, there are lots of scenarios that we see in the collaboration space. Some of which, as we've discussed, relate to collaboration across multiple tenants. That could be Microsoft to Microsoft collaboration. Important to know that for those scenarios, we absolutely recommend the use of solutions like multi-tenant organization to improve the secure collaboration experience across that particular scenario. Another use case is external applications that are being made available to external users. How do we ensure that we're securely offering up those external applications to those external users in a way that's monitored, resilient, and ultimately least privilege? Thirdly, which is very common for those environments that do have multiple, we'll call it environment types that support sensitive data types of lots of categories to include, health information, to include financial information, sensitive data like CUI. Important to leverage where possible things like the modern secure collaboration framework to ensure that the layers of control and security are commensurate with the sensitive data types and/or the collaboration scenarios that are prevalent within the university. So just a couple things wanted to make sure we shared as we know that these are commonly scenarios that come up in the higher education space.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. All right, just to kind of close things out, I'm going to skip this slide. I don't think we need a summary. But this last slide here that we're going to talk through, this is a workshop that OCG designed. It really kind of looks through the eyes of key user journeys from joiner, mover, leaver, both from the hiring manager and the joiner perspective. We look at helping fight help desk fraud, as well as reducing dependency on those VPN technologies we talked about earlier. This workshop can be delivered anywhere from 1 to 2 hour format. If you're interested in hearing more about this, please feel free to scan that QR code and I'll follow up with you. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a challenge. We talked about the importance of unifying identity systems, safeguarding collaboration, managing complexity. And the question now is, how are you going to apply this knowledge in your institutions? What are the gaps that you can close? What steps will you take to bridge the divide between secure access and seamless collaboration?
Okay, don't think so. All right, Brandon. Well, it sounds like there were some key things and takeaways that the audience may get from today's session. I know you offered up the Entra Suite workshop, which I'm a huge fan of, from the perspective of knowing what we need to know about our identity environment and being able to strategically take steps to refine our architecture and help extend the design that we have to support the use cases that are relevant. So, any parting word for those in regards to, I think it was a QR code, correct? QR code is the next step.
Yeah, QR code is
Okay.
next step. Thanks so much for the time, and thanks for staying a couple extra minutes with us. Appreciate the extra time, and we look forward to seeing you guys on a future one.